particular welcome, of course, to His Excellency Mohammed Al Jadaan, Finance Minister of Saudi Arabia. Great pleasure to meet you and to have you here on stage. Now, we've talked a lot already, Minister, about, particularly actually this morning, about investment. It's about opportunity, it's about conundrums and dilemmas, it's about frustrations. It covers the whole gamut, actually. So the idea of reimagining how this can work, given the revolution, really, that we're heading into, is, I think, critically important. And I just wonder, there is an issue, and it's a perception issue, of course, that as soon as you start excavating more and digging up more for that transition, there are those who are going to raise their hands and say, hang on a minute, this is exactly the opposite of what we should be doing for our planet. So I just wonder if you could address that first, because that is a dilemma.
Indeed it is, and thank you everyone for being here. Few things to start with. First of all, I don't think at all there is a contradiction between mining and energy transition. To the contrary, I think they actually correlate globally. For the transition, you need mining, and you need it possibly a lot more than before. I think the secret here is doing it sensibly, doing it sustainably, and doing it taking in mind the planet's health. Okay. Second point, which is critically important, is, for you to have an proper energy transition, you will need batteries, you will need wind turbines, you will need EVs, just to say example. And for that to develop, you will need lithium, you will need rare earth metals, you will need copper, you will need other minerals. And we have heard earlier, even today, how much more do we need of these if we are actually to be successful in the energy transition. So I don't think there is actually a contradiction. I think it is, if we do it the right way, if we invest in mining in a smart way, in a sustainable way, I think they need to go together for us to achieve our objectives.
One of the messages out of that is urgency, isn't it? I think everyone recognizes that we are being told this must be done extremely quickly. What does that mean for really each and every country in terms of some sort of plan to put in place, probably now, that will enable that speed to be reached or even maintained? Or even half that speed, to be honest.
Well, that's, I think, the million-dollar question. There is no magic solution to this. There is a very clear road that we need to go through, which needs to take into consideration country-specific circumstances. We need to take into consideration not only the planet is very important, but the only reason why we are after the health of the planet is because we want to make sure that it is livable. And livable means people. So you need to make sure that also, whatever the transition mission is that it is good for the people, it is good for the economy, it's good for the investors, it's good for the relevant countries, and countries differ. I mean, if we look at mining generally in the wider definition of mining, where are the mines and metals? A lot of mines and metals you will find, and minerals, you will find them actually in low-income countries.
Yeah.
And so low-income countries would not have what it needs. You will need fiscal buffers, you will need strong economies, you will need strong governance, you will need talent available. And if you are saying, I will only do it where all of these are available, ready, then you are actually depriving these low-income countries from, and penalizing them even, from participating in this energy transition. The last point, which is, I think it's very critical, is what should we do? What should we really do to handle this? It is not a one-country effort. It cannot be done by one country. It cannot be done by one sector. It's not the mining alone. It's not the government alone. It's not the financiers alone. It's not the multilateral development institutions alone. It will need to be a collaborative effort.
Yeah. Can I take you back to the low-income countries you mentioned there? We've had figures about the scale of debt servicing increasing by, I think a figure was put out of up to 39%. I mean, these are not countries that are going to be able to afford any investment of their own, clearly. And you mentioned also being country-specific. So what, if you could flesh that out a little bit, what does that look like for low-income countries? I mean, they will be listening and thinking, sounds promising.
I think a few things. One is, if you look at the World Bank IDA eligible countries, which is around 70 countries who are eligible to borrow, in 22, they had to pay about $88.9 billion of debt service at a time when they are really, really suffering from multiple shocks. COVID, supply chain disruptions, inflation, geopolitical tensions, and then an interest rate.
Yeah.
And as you said, it is likely that we will see significant increase in their debt service, 39% increase in 23 and 24. That will put these low-income countries in a very difficult position if we are not careful. And this is why within the G20, within the IMF, and within the World Bank, but also in the wider scope, there is a lot of discussion about how should we deal with debt distress and help these countries restructure their positions, their debt, in a way that is more sustainable, in a way that will enable them to join as a beneficiary from the transition, energy transition, including utilizing their own resources, their own endowment of minerals, of metals, that then will help not only the low-income countries, but also the world in moving into a more sustainable environment where the planet needs. So it's a long journey where all these constituents, whether it is investors, whether it is the multilateral development institution, whether it is the sovereign wealth fund, whether it is investors, need to work together. And there is a lot of effort already underway, but still there will need to be more efforts to make sure that we don't leave these countries behind.
There is some optimism in some of the examples you've given there, actually, about extracting now and using that to some extent to help to manage debts. I see interest rates are beginning to fall in certain parts of the world, which possibly would alleviate a little bit of the pain. So let's just have a think then, briefly, if we can, about how you get that investment into the system and now, and who has to put it there? Because, as you've made very clear, time is ticking.
Absolutely. I think you will need a combination of few things. You will need strong, robust, clear legislative framework that takes into consideration long-term perspective of this industry. You will need to ensure that multilateral institutions support particular countries who are in need, who really are unable to do it themselves. You need to make sure that you create an ecosystem that is able to actually crowd in private sectors. You need to make sure that you remove ideology from the equation and bring science. And I've borrowed a statement, I quoted a statement from a friend before, which says, you cannot have your cake and eat it and even lose weight. So you can't have these. I mean, it is a balance between the environment, which is very important, growth, which is very important, affordability, which is very important, and making sure that the financial system is able to provide financing to mining companies. I mean, we need a lot more mining than what we have today. I think you have heard it a few times today. And if the financial system is locked and closed in the face of the mining companies, we are not going to get there. And if we are going to hammer financial institutions and banks and say, no, you need to only finance green projects and forget about green transition, that it is going to take time, it is a lot of effort, then it's going to be very difficult. And I'm hopeful, even through the discussions with the World Bank and the IMF, that actually we are moving in the right direction. It's painful, it's slow, but hopefully we will be there.
I think you have spelled out a route. Our title here is Reimagining Global Finance, and that sort of opens up all sorts of possible vistas and what could we do and how much creativity and innovation might there be. And there is clearly space for that, isn't there?
Absolutely.
But
I think you need to reimagine finance. You need to reimagine finance. And this is why I said, if we continue the rhetoric of putting pressure on financial institutions, we are not going to get into the transition, which is going to be very unfortunate.
And from what I've heard from investors, from some of the mining companies, there is also that need to reduce risk. And that has been fairly apparent in much of the work and the development funding that Saudi Arabia has been bringing to the fore.
Absolutely. I mean, I think in Saudi, I can tell you, a 70 years journey, we learned a lot. And we learned that you need to take long-term perspective, you need to be patient, and you need to be very focused. You need to make sure that you work collaboratively, you need to make sure that you provide incentives, you need to make sure that you de-risk for the private sector certain risks that they cannot afford to take. But at the same time, you need to avoid complacency. So you need to put them on their toes when it comes to ESG. You need to make sure that they are efficient in their business. They are doing it in a sustainable way. Private sector is able to do this. We have seen examples after examples of private sector actually being able to do this in Saudi Arabia and elsewhere. And there is no reason why this cannot be expanded.
But just as a last point, there are investors out there who might be turning now to looking at mining as a possible route, particularly with critical minerals. But it's been pointed out to me here, and I'm very much an ignoramus on mining, at least I felt I was, that it is massively complex and complicated as an investment proposition, isn't it? Is there a way, do you think, of communicating better the messages about critical minerals in particular?
I think yes. Few things to take into consideration. One is we recognize as governments that for mining to develop, it is 10, 15 years journey, which means investors will need predictability and clarity in legislation. Investors need to know that the government, as I said last year, the government does not take this as a revenue play, but as an economic play. And therefore, their success as investors is your success. If that equation changes, then it's a problem. So you need to make sure that your legislative process sends this message very clearly, robustly. And you need to communicate. You need to communicate with investors. You need to communicate with financiers to make sure that they all work together to achieve that sustainable development. Otherwise, it will not work.
Well, let's hope that this forum is another step on the route from talk to action, which is, of course, the key. Your Excellency, thank you so much for laying that out with crystal clarity as well. Ladies and gentlemen, His Excellency, thank you very much indeed for being with us.
Thank you very much.